The Lawson family portrait remains one of the most haunting images in true crime history. Taken just weeks before Christmas in 1929, the photograph captures the family posed in their Sunday best, staring solemnly into the camera. Charles Lawson, the head of the family, stands at the center. His broad shoulders and stern expression reflect the weight of a man accustomed to hard work and sacrifice. Beside him is his wife, Fanny, holding their infant daughter, Mary Lou. The children are arranged by age. Marie, the eldest at 17, looks poised and thoughtful. Carrie and Maybelle, at 12 and 7 years old respectively, wear matching ribbons in their hair, their innocence almost palpable. The youngest boys, James and Raymond, fidget at the edges of the group, their youthful energy barely contained. The portrait was no casual affair. For a farming family struggling in the throes of the Great Depression, paying for a professional photograph and new clothing for everyone was a rare indulgence. Neighbors were puzzled by the extravagance, particularly since Charles was known for his frugality. He had insisted on the photo, brushing off any questions. Some later speculated that he was marking the end of something, an eerie farewell to the life he had built. Now, the portrait stands as a haunting artifact of what was lost. A moment meant to preserve family unity instead became a grim reminder of the darkness that followed. The smiles that might have softened the photo's somber mood were absent, as if even the children sensed an unspoken tension in the air. It was a picturesque Christmas morning in Germanton, North Carolina. Snow blanketed the fields, and the chill of winter seeped into the creaking wooden boards of the Lawson family farmhouse. Inside, the family prepared for the holiday. Fanny was busy in the kitchen, her movements quick and practiced as she prepared breakfast for her children. Marie, the eldest, helped decorate, placing fresh sprigs of holly around the room to add a touch of festive cheer. Charles appeared unusually cheerful, moving between rooms with a smile that, in hindsight, seemed unnervingly out of place. To the casual observer, it was a scene of normalcy, a hard-working family enjoying a simple holiday together. But beneath the surface, something dark lingered. Charles's behavior in the days leading up to Christmas had been peculiar. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and yet oddly insistent on certain rituals, like ensuring the family stayed together that day. As the children laughed and played, their father's calm demeanor masked an inner storm. No one could have known that this ordinary Christmas morning would be the last they ever spent together. The crisp air of Christmas morning was heavy with anticipation as Carrie, 12 years old, and Maybelle, 7 years old, headed down the dirt path toward a neighbor's house. The sisters giggled, their boots crunching through the snow, completely unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Suddenly, their father, Charles Lawson, stepped out from behind a tree, his shotgun gripped tightly in his hands. There was no warning, no hesitation. A deafening crack split the stillness as Charles fired, striking Carrie first. Maybelle froze in terror, but before she could run, Charles reloaded and fired again, ending her young life. The horror did not end there. In a chilling display of control, Charles bludgeoned their already lifeless bodies with the butt of his shotgun, ensuring no chance of survival. He then dragged their small forms into the barn, arranging them side by side as if they were sleeping. He crossed their arms over their chests and placed rocks beneath their heads, almost like crude pillows, a grotesque mimicry of tenderness. This was no impulsive act. The precision, the deliberate staging of their bodies, it all pointed to a dark, methodical plan. The idyllic snow-covered path was now a crime scene, the first step in what would become one of the most harrowing massacres in true crime history. Charles Lawson returned to the farmhouse, his hands steady, his movements unhurried. On the porch stood his wife, Fanny, busy with the daily chores that kept their household running. She didn't notice the shotgun in his hands until it was too late. Without a word, Charles raised the weapon and fired. The blast tore through the stillness of the morning, echoing across the snow-covered fields. Fanny crumpled to the ground, her life extinguished in an instant. The sound of the gunshot sent shockwaves through the small farmhouse. Inside, the children froze in confusion and fear. Marie, 17 years old, and the eldest rushed toward the sound, her heart pounding as she realized something was terribly wrong. But Charles was already stepping through the doorway. The nightmare was only beginning. The farmhouse, once a place of warmth and laughter, had become a stage for unspeakable violence. Outside, Fanny's lifeless body lay in the snow, while inside, the remaining children would soon face their father's unimaginable wrath. The walls of the Lawson farmhouse bore silent witness to the carnage that unfolded inside. After shooting Fanny on the porch, Charles stepped through the doorway, his shotgun held tightly in his hands. The air was thick with fear and confusion as the remaining children realized something was terribly wrong. 17-year-old Marie, who had been decorating the home for Christmas, was the first to confront her father. She screamed, begging for answers, but Charles was resolute. He raised the shotgun and fired, silencing her pleas forever. James, just 4 years old, and his younger brother, Raymond, only 2, cowered together in a corner, their cries echoing through the house. Charles turned his attention to them next. Without hesitation, he ended their short lives, the sound of his shotgun reverberating through the once cozy home. And then there was Mary Lou. Only 4 months old, she had no understanding of the horrors surrounding her. Charles's brutality knew no bounds. He used a blunt object to end her life in what could only be described as an act of sheer savagery. The house fell silent, save for the ringing in Charles's ears. Blood stained the floors and walls, mingling with the remnants of Christmas decorations and the smell of gunpowder. The brutality of his actions defied comprehension, leaving the home a symbol of love and family transformed into a scene of unspeakable horror. With the massacre complete, Charles walked out the back door of the farmhouse, leaving behind the lifeless bodies of his wife and children. His destination, the woods that bordered their property, a place of solitude where he could wrestle with his inner torment. He carried his shotgun and a bundle of handwritten letters addressed to his parents, though the exact contents of these letters remain a mystery. Witnesses would later describe footprints in the snow, evidence that Charles had paced back and forth for hours, as if struggling with his conscience or preparing for his final act. By now, the silence at the Lawson home had begun to alarm neighbors. It was Christmas Day, and the family had been expected to host visitors. When no one answered their calls or knocks, unease grew, and the community began to gather outside the farmhouse. In the woods, Charles was alone with his thoughts, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The man who had once been a devoted father and husband was now a monster in the eyes of the world. As the hours passed, he paced endlessly, as if searching for an escape from the darkness within. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the snowy fields, neighbors decided to investigate the Lawson farmhouse. The eerie silence emanating from the home was unlike the usual bustling noise of a large family on Christmas Day. Their unease deepened as they approached the front porch, where Fanny's lifeless body lay crumpled in the snow, her blood staining the pristine white surface. Summoning their courage, the neighbors pushed open the door, only to be greeted by a scene of unimaginable carnage. Blood smeared the walls and pooled on the wooden floors, the stark crimson standing in harsh contrast to the festive decorations that Marie had carefully arranged just hours before. Inside, the lifeless bodies of the children lay where they had fallen. Marie, who had likely run toward her father in desperation, was sprawled in the kitchen. James and Raymond were huddled together, as if seeking comfort in their final moments. Baby Mary Lou's small form was cradled in a bloodied corner, her innocence obliterated by a father's unthinkable wrath. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of spilled blood. The neighbors, overcome by shock and horror, could hardly process the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Word spread quickly, and the once quiet community was soon buzzing with panic and confusion. The Lawson home had become the epicenter of a tragedy that defied all understanding. As the search for Charles began, the woods behind the Lawson home loomed dark and foreboding. A group of neighbors and local law enforcement ventured into the trees, their breath visible in the freezing air. They called out his name, but no response came. Instead, the silence was broken by a single, echoing gunshot. Rushing toward the sound, the searchers stumbled upon a haunting sight. Charles Lawson's body was slumped against the base of a tree, his shotgun resting loosely in his lap. The snow around him was stained red, the unmistakable result of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His face was eerily calm, as if finally free from the torment that had consumed him. Beside him lay a crumpled letter, its contents addressed to his parents. Though the full text of the letter remains unknown, it hinted at a man plagued by inner demons and overwhelming despair. Around the scene were footprints in the snow, evidence of hours spent pacing in agonizing contemplation before he ultimately chose to end his life. For those who found him, the finality of the discovery offered no solace. The unanswered questions, the why behind his monstrous actions, only deepened the tragedy. Charles Lawson's death marked the end of the massacre, but it did little to explain the horrors that had unfolded on that Christmas day. As the community of Germanton tried to come to terms with the events of Christmas Day, one question dominated every conversation. Why? Why would Charles Lawson, a seemingly devoted father and husband, commit such an unthinkable act? The quiet farmhouse that had once symbolized family and hard work was now a symbol of horror and senseless violence. Neighbors recalled moments from the days and weeks before the tragedy, desperately searching for clues they might have missed. Charles had shown no obvious signs of rage or despair. He had, in fact, seemed unusually cheerful in the weeks leading up to Christmas. This unsettling normalcy made the massacre even harder to comprehend. As whispers spread and rumors grew, theories began to emerge, each more disturbing than the last. Was it financial ruin, a sudden mental break, or something darker, buried deep within the family's private life? Theories swirled like the snow that blanketed the fields around the farmhouse, but no definitive answers came. Instead, the questions only deepened the community's grief. One of the earliest theories centered on the financial hardships that plagued so many families during the Great Depression. Like most farmers in rural North Carolina, Charles Lawson struggled to make ends meet. Crops were unpredictable, and debts loomed over many households, including the Lawson families. The pressure to provide for a wife and 7 children must have weighed heavily on him. But this theory raised more questions than it answered. If financial despair had driven Charles to murder, why had he gone to such lengths to arrange the family portrait weeks earlier? The expensive new clothes, the payment to the photographer, these were not the actions of a man consumed by financial ruin. Neighbors noted that Charles had not shared any specific complaints about money in the days leading up to the tragedy. In fact, the Lawsons appeared no worse off than many others in their community. This contradiction cast doubt on the financial strain theory, though it couldn't be entirely dismissed. Was it possible that Charles saw the portrait as a final act of dignity for his family before ending their lives? Or was there something deeper, a psychological unraveling that even he may not have understood? The Great Depression was a cruel and grinding time, but for Charles, it seemed not to be the whole story. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Charles Lawson suffered a significant head injury while working on the farm. Although details about the incident are scarce, those closest to him began to notice subtle but troubling changes. He became more withdrawn, and his typically calm demeanor gave way to moments of irritability and tension. At the time, little was known about the potential long-term effects of head injuries, but modern science suggests that such trauma can sometimes lead to behavioral changes or emotional instability. This theory has led some to wonder, could the injury have disrupted Charles's ability to think clearly or regulate his emotions? While there is no way to confirm this theory, those who witnessed the change in his behavior were left questioning whether the accident might have played a role in the events that followed. Was it a hidden injury that slowly altered his judgment, or were there deeper issues that the injury merely amplified? Years after the tragedy, a family member came forward with an unsettling claim, one that cast a shadow over the entire case. According to this relative, tensions in the Lawson household stemmed from a troubling family secret. The claim suggested that Charles may have been involved in inappropriate behavior toward his eldest daughter, Marie. This allegation, though unproven, has sparked much speculation. The relative stated that Marie had confided in her mother, Fanny, and that the family had been grappling with how to handle the situation in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Some have theorized that this tension might have played a role in the tragedy, suggesting that guilt or fear of exposure weighed heavily on Charles. Whether this claim is fact or rumor remains unknown, as no concrete evidence has ever surfaced. However, it remains one of the most discussed theories, adding an unsettling dimension to an already tragic story. In the aftermath of the tragedy, some experts speculated that Charles Lawson may have been battling an undiagnosed mental illness. His increasingly erratic behavior, coupled with a tendency toward obsessive actions, such as insisting on the unusual family portrait, hinted at deep psychological struggles. Mental health in the late 1920s was a largely misunderstood and stigmatized subject. Conditions like severe depression, psychosis, or other disorders often went untreated as they were poorly understood and rarely discussed openly. If Charles was suffering internally, he likely did so in silence, without the support or resources that might have helped him. Theories about mental illness offered a possible explanation for the tragedy, but they also raised further questions. If Charles was struggling mentally, why had no one intervened? Did his outward composure mask the turmoil beneath, or did societal expectations at the time prevent those around him from recognizing the signs? While the role of mental health remains speculative, it provides a lens through which we can attempt to understand the actions of a man who otherwise seemed like a devoted husband and father. But in 1929, these complexities were often met with silence, leaving the true depths of his struggle unknown. As news of the Lawson family tragedy broke, the small town of Germanton was thrust into the national spotlight. Reporters from across the country descended on the area, desperate to uncover the details behind the horrific event. Sensational headlines filled newspapers, portraying Charles Lawson as both a cold-blooded killer and a man overwhelmed by pressures beyond his control. The public was gripped by the story, their curiosity fueled by the tragedy's unusual timing and the haunting family portrait taken just weeks before. Articles speculated wildly about Charles's motives, often blending fact with conjecture. Some focused on the family's financial struggles, while others delved into the darker theories about Charles's behavior. For the residents of Germanton, the media frenzy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought attention to their quiet town, but on the other, it turned their grief into a spectacle. Reporters swarmed the Lawson home, eager for photographs and interviews, leaving the community struggling to find peace in the wake of such a public tragedy. In the years following the tragedy, the Lawson home became an unsettling tourist destination. Thousands of visitors flocked to the farmhouse, drawn by morbid curiosity and the eerie allure of the unsolved mystery. The property was left largely untouched after the events of Christmas Day. Furniture remained as it was, with some items bearing stains and marks that served as grim reminders of what had occurred. Tourists paid to walk through the house, some hoping to find answers in the silent, frozen tableau of the Lawson family's final moments. The family's belongings, including the now infamous portrait, were displayed prominently, adding to the macabre fascination. Some visitors claimed to feel an oppressive energy in the house, as though the tragedy lingered in the very walls. The Lawson homestead, once a place of family and love, had transformed into a symbol of loss and unanswered questions. Though its doors eventually closed to the public, the house's reputation as a haunted site ensured its place in local lore and in the annals of true crime history. After the tragedy, the Lawson family home became an unexpected and unsettling tourist attraction. Word of the Christmas Day massacre spread quickly, and people from neighboring towns and even distant cities flocked to Germanton, driven by curiosity and a morbid fascination with the tragedy. The house was left largely untouched, preserved as it had been on the day of the murders. Visitors walked through rooms that held eerie remnants of the family's daily life, dishes still on the table, furniture in disarray, and the haunting presence of the family portrait prominently displayed. The very air seemed heavy, as if the house itself bore witness to the events that unfolded within its walls. Neighbors who once avoided speaking of the tragedy found themselves reluctantly accommodating the influx of tourists. Some charged admission for entry, using the funds to offset the impact the sudden attention had on their community. Over time, the house became a symbol not just of loss, but of the public's unending quest to understand the incomprehensible. Even as decades passed, whispers of ghostly presences and unexplained occurrences kept the Lawson home alive in local folklore. For those who visited, the experience was as much about grappling with the mysteries of the human mind as it was about understanding the terrible events that forever marked this quiet farmhouse. The Lawson family tragedy didn't just shock the community, it inspired an outpouring of creative interpretations that immortalized the events in American folklore. One of the most notable was a haunting ballad titled "The Murder of the Lawson Family," a song that recounted the events in chilling, almost poetic detail. Sung in somber tones, the ballad captured the sorrow and horror of the Christmas Day massacre, ensuring the story would linger in public memory for years to come. Books followed, delving into the many theories surrounding Charles Lawson's motives. These accounts ranged from journalistic explorations to fictionalized retellings, each adding a new layer to the mystery. Films and documentaries, too, attempted to capture the essence of the tragedy, often focusing on the haunting family portrait as a symbol of the life cut short. Though these adaptations varied in tone and accuracy, they all contributed to the case's enduring legacy. The songs and stories transformed the Lawson murders into a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fragile the bonds of family can be and how little we often know about the struggles of those closest to us. Arthur Lawson, the eldest of Charles and Fanny's children, was the only family member to escape the Christmas Day tragedy. On the morning of the murders, Charles had sent Arthur, aged 16, on an errand to purchase ammunition for hunting, an act many believe was a calculated effort to remove him from the scene. When Arthur returned home, he was met with the unimaginable. The farmhouse, once filled with the sounds of laughter and family life, stood silent. As neighbors gathered and the grim reality unfolded, Arthur learned that his entire family was gone, leaving him as the sole survivor. The weight of his survival followed Arthur for the rest of his life. Though he tried to move forward, marrying and starting a family of his own, the shadow of that day loomed large. Survivor's guilt and the unanswered questions surrounding his father's actions left a mark on Arthur that he rarely spoke of. Arthur's survival also sparked speculation. Why had he been spared? Some theorized that Charles intended for Arthur to carry on the family name. Others wondered if Arthur's presence that day might have disrupted the plan, preventing Charles from carrying out his intentions completely. Though Arthur never publicly revealed the full extent of his thoughts about that fateful day, His quiet resilience became a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure unimaginable loss. Decades later, the Lawson family murders remain one of the most perplexing and debated cases in true crime history. Despite the many theories, no definitive motive has ever been established, leaving behind a cloud of speculation and unanswered questions. Was Charles Lawson driven by financial strain, his responsibilities as a farmer and father becoming too much to bear? Did his head injury alter his mental state, creating impulses he could neither understand nor control? Or were there darker, more hidden tensions within the family's secrets that even today remain buried? Adding to the mystery is the strange insistence on the family portrait taken weeks before the tragedy. Was it a sign of premeditation, a deliberate effort to preserve an image of unity before the family's destruction? The lack of closure ensures the Lawson family murders remain a subject of fascination. Historians, true crime enthusiasts, and even amateur sleuths continue to revisit the case, hoping to uncover something new. Yet, the truth seems to remain just out of reach, locked in the past along with the tragic events of that Christmas day. The tragedy of the Lawson family murders left an indelible mark on Germanton, a quiet town that once prided itself on close-knit connections and neighborly trust. Families who had shared meals with the Lawsons and helped with their harvests found themselves grappling with an overwhelming sense of grief and disbelief. For weeks after the event, the town was enveloped in an eerie silence, broken only by hushed whispers and lingering questions. Parents kept their children closer, neighbors eyed one another with suspicion, and the once vibrant community spirit felt fractured. The house itself stood as a chilling reminder of the tragedy, casting a shadow over the town that would never fully fade. The Lawson family was gone, but their story remained a scar etched into the collective memory of Germanton. Over the years, as the story was retold, the small town became synonymous with one of the darkest days in true crime history, forever changing the way its residents viewed themselves and each other. As time moves on, the Lawson family murders continue to haunt both Germanton and the larger world of true crime. The story is a labyrinth of unanswered questions. What drove Charles Lawson to such a horrifying act? Why did he insist on the family portrait, an unusual extravagance for a struggling farmer? Were there signs that those closest to him missed, or were his intentions concealed behind a carefully maintained facade? Perhaps the most chilling question of all is this: could such an unthinkable act happen again? The Lawson family tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the complexities of the human mind and the hidden struggles that can erupt into devastating consequences. The case has left behind not just a legacy of sorrow, but also a cautionary tale, one that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about mental health, family dynamics, and the weight of societal pressures. What do you think really happened that day? Was it financial strain, a hidden injury, or something far more sinister? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue to unravel the mystery together.